Hello everyone, you're all here for Hebrew in Israel. Thank you for joining me again. And I get asked a very specific question over and over again because of the presence of very specific teachers online, and that has to do with Ashkenaz phonology. For those who don't understand, phonology is basically the actualization of sounds within a language. Now, I am not officially a linguist, it has to be emphasized. Therefore, I don't really know the entire background of how the Ashkenaz vocalization came to be, but in my work as a Hebrew teacher and also as a researcher, historian, and so on, I have come across this topic quite a bit. And when I was much younger, I was fascinated with the Yemenite accent, and I actually prayed in a Yemenite synagogue for a very long time. Most people hear me read from the Tanakh usually recognize this. I was actually once in a synagogue years ago in America, and I was asked to read from the Haftarah, and I read, and one of the people walked up and said, "You have like a Yemenite twang in the background." I'm like, "That's actually it." Thanks to one of my teachers back in the day, unfortunately passed away. It was a very old man from Sana'a, and the interesting thing about phonology in Jewish accents is that there really isn't a steadfast rule, which means that every time someone tries to standardize something, it gets unstandardized. And the reason for this is mostly because languages are very, very changeable, very interchangeable, and so on. So, for example, my family is from England, and growing up here in Israel, I was mostly exposed to how my parents spoke. However, my parents watched a lot of BBC, and in the BBC you hear all these different accents, and they're all speaking English. It's all perfectly fine. And then we have the American accent, and the Americans also have here and there and everywhere different kind of vocalizations of different words. And I've even had people challenge the way I speak because of certain vocalization anomalies that happen amongst the English speakers, but even also saying among or amongst and things like that. There are different things that I developed in my own vocalization because of my enunciation that I do when I read in Hebrew, which has affected the way I speak English. Now, when I was younger, I would actually lose syllables as I speak in English because of the fact that that was the accent I grew up with as a child. It was this interesting mixture of a London accent with a Midland accent. And teaching Hebrew has taught me to enunciate better, which means that I actually speak something that's somewhat even closer to the Queen's English, or nowadays will be King's English, but everyone knows it's the Queen's English. So the same thing with Hebrew. You have a plethora of vocalizations which are a result of lots of different things that happened. So a lot of this discussion goes back into medieval times. So our vocalization markers that we find within different biblical texts go back to medieval times, and the actualization of sounds was dependent on local practices. Even though the Masoretes tried to create some kind of a standardization of the vocalization of Hebrew, as Jeffrey Kahn has demonstrated in his wonderful book on the topic. By the way, for free, you can go to the website, what is it called, Open Press or Open Book Press, something like that. Actually, if you give me a second, I actually have a book here by them. I can give you the exact name. It is called, through Cambridge, it's called Open Book Publications. The books look like this. Wonderful, wonderful books for free. You can download PDFs for free legally, and just wonderful things there. So there's one by Jeffrey Kahn there about the Masoretic text. Just absolutely fascinating. That one's very fascinating. So that's more for linguists. It's more of a kind of complicated discussion. Still very, very good book if you're interested in reading it. Just go in there, enjoy. It's a treasure trove of books for free as PDFs. Just amazing stuff. And what happens? They try to standardize it, and it doesn't really work because there are lots and lots of reading traditions. So I do have an upcoming video about the different vocalizations of Shva, for example. I've already alluded to some of the information there on different occasions. I put a an article on my Patreon, Yoel Halevi, comma, Hebrew in Israel. That's where I'm working from right now because my website is completely down. I'm not even sure I'm going to bring it back. I don't think there's any need for it anymore. And what's interesting is that at that time, there were lots and lots of different vocalizations. You had Jews from Greek-speaking areas that spoke a little bit differently. Like, for example, their shva was an more, even places where they literally replaced it with an there's a Babylonian or Iraqi vocalization, which is more what I lean to today. The Yemenites as well. The Yemenite vocalization has many elements of the Iraqi vocalization of Hebrew, of the Masoretic text, in the way they vocalize things, especially when we talk about the vocalization of Segol as an A. That's one of the most famous parts. Then you have Ashkenaz. Interesting thing about Ashkenaz is, first of all, the Ashkenaz vocalization stems from what people call the Palestinian vocalization. It's because the place was called Palestine at the time. Roman name, obviously, without going into the whole political story behind that and how it affects us today, because this is not about politics, so please don't make it about politics. And we call it Eretz Israeli. This is it's written as one word, or you can call it the Roman era, Byzantine, whatever you want. And we actually have some texts which are marked in their system, and this seems to become like the father or mother, if you want to call it, of the Ashkenaz and Sephardic vocalization. Sephardic vocalization goes through its own story because you have the Spanish Jews that eventually go into North Africa, into parts of Europe, into Syria, into Greece. Like, for example, my family may have actually been from Greece. And the prayer books that we used were Spanish Portuguese. It's one of the evidence that my family is actually Sephardic in its origins. My grandfather had Spanish Portuguese Sidurim, which were part of the family heirlooms, part of the heritage, and which is not unusual. I traced down a lot of things as an historian. I traced down a lot of things that showed us where my family's from. So when you say someone's from Europe, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're Ashkenazi. That's the funny thing. I grew up with an Israeli accent, which means that it is more leaning towards the Sephardic accent with lots of Ashkenaz elements. Like, for example, people don't use chet and ayin on a regular basis. So chet, for example, if you put your finger here and go and press in, you can produce a chet, which is no different really from a hey, but okay. Ayin, on the other hand, if you put your fingers here and you press inwards, that's basically an ayin. That's how you produce those two sounds. But in my Hebrew teacher when I was in high school was a man whose family came from Morocco, and he spoke with a chet and ayin, and I got used to speaking like that. So I'm a bit of an odd duck sometimes in the street when I use chet and ayin, and people think it's kind of cool. There's also uses of resh. So my father, for example, used resh, which is the way Old Ashkenaz. Now we're going to get to Ashkenaz vocalization. Old Ashkenaz used to go resh. I still meet people in the street that go resh. I made a video quite a while back about rolling the R, if to roll or not. Really, in truth, there may have been different ways of producing the resh. I mean, today I'm working from a different position where I talk about this type of information, but resh would have been one of the forms. Not a heavy rolling R, we're not speaking Scottish or something, but you see, just flick the tongue on the top of your mouth, just behind your teeth. And you also have the resh and resh. Resh is the way we use it in modern Hebrew. But in Ashkenaz, they would go resh. And Hasidic Jews, for example, go resh. That's one of the elements of Hasidic accents. Now, there is a difference between the Hasidic accent and the Ashkenaz accent. The Hasidic accent is very heavy, and I don't know much about it because I haven't spent a lot of time around Hasidic Jews, but I know that, for example, their U turns into an E, so they say Eloheini instead of Elohenu. Their E in Eloheini turns almost like an A. So again, there's these subtle twists that happen in things. So we have the core of the Masoretic text, which is how our vowel points work, but then you get other things that show up that are influencing the way it does. So it's kind of a funny thing where, as Kant puts it, you create a standardization and then you create a non-standardized, but they're using, Ashkenaz use the same vowel points as the Masoretes and everyone else, except for the Yemenites. The Yemenites for a very long time still use the Babylonian nikud, which is written above and only has 6 sounds. There's an I instead of an E, so you have less E's there. We'll maybe do a video sometime about the Babylonian nikud. And what you end up with is a symbols being used differently from what they were intended. But here's the interesting catch. So first of all, one of the most famous ones is the O sound, the rounded kamat, sometimes drawn as like a funny looking C when you do it in linguistics. And what's very interesting about this is the rounding of the kamats into an O, known as komets in the Masoretic literature, and that's how most grammar is treated, komets, the kamet, to round your A sound. This actually the Masoretes produced. And this is why in Ashkenaz, you find Ashkenaz pronunciation, which is the majority of videos out there, because in English at least, because most of the rabbis that deal with people and are around the world are either Chabad or Ashkenazim, and they're used to saying O. So for example, mishpoche, or mishpocha. Usually it's mishpoche because at the end there, instead of I is a Hasidic thing, but you find, Shabbos. Usually it's Shabbos. Again, the O turns into an E. There's a lot of E sounds in the Ashkenaz pronunciation, Hasidic specifically. But for example, Shabbos. Okay? We'll get to the S sound in a moment. This rounding of the kamats into a constant O is something we find the Masoretes did keep to some degree. They produced it into some level. Yemenites do this all the time. So for example, Shabboth. Okay, there's a song we used to sing on this thing of Shabboth Menucha. Okay, and the whole idea is the O sound is something the Yemenites carried from the Masoretes as well into their vocalization, but it's not in the original Iraqi vocalization, which would have said Shabbath. Okay, so that's the O sound. So many times when you see O, unless there's a vav there indicating a full cholam or an actual cholam, you need to consider that the Masoretic Hebrew would have been A, and Israeli Hebrew would have been A as well. But again, this rounding of the sound is not something unusual. There is in truth, no actual true way of vocalizing Hebrew. I mean, we even have this in the Bible where we find places where things are vocalized slightly different from one place to the other because of some historical thing. And again, this is a very, very complicated topic, and I truly, truly recommend this book. Okay? This is by Benjamin Cantor. Really, really good book. Thoroughly enjoying it, and towards the end of it, comes up with a lot of very, very interesting points. Just worth it. If you have the time, download it for free. You don't have to pay even money, and just read it. He brings up a lot of very, very interesting things. That's one of the reasons why I'm making this video, because I'm in the middle of reading that book, although I'm towards the end. And questions I get asked all the time. Now, the S sound, this is not something he deals with. Why does Ashkenaz pronunciation always have a S sound at the end? Well, this has to do with the Bagad Kafat, or Beged Kefet, as we call it here in Israel. This is a grouping of consonants that have double sounds. B, V, G, R. There was a R sound. The R originally actually belonged to the Rhein, but that's a whole discussion by itself. D, the, like a hard TH. Bet, Gimel, Daled. Okay, and then Kaf, Pei, Tav, K, Ch, P, F, T, and then in Masoretic Hebrew, Th, soft TH. Now, these vocalizations specifically may have actually entered Hebrew through Aramaic during the Second Temple era. We start seeing signs of these little changes that happen. And when we look at, for example, Jerome's in translation or transliteration into Latin, we have the seconda and hexapla. We have places where we can see people writing words in Greek, especially when we're talking about the Greek transliteration of names and so on. You can see that there were some places where they still kept certain sounds, like B was still B, even though we do V. Like, for example, Rivka is Rebecca, which is why you get Rebecca in English, and so on. And what happens is the th sound becomes standard in a lot of different vocalizations of Hebrew, but at some point in Europe, in Ashkenaz, the th becomes s. It hardens a little bit more, and instead of a th sound, like Shabboth, it becomes Shabbos, and then Shabbos. What happens, the reason it becomes Shabbos is because in Ashkenaz, diphthongs were still around, ow, a, and so on, and then there's this more rounding of sounds. So a turning into e is not unusual. There's a thing called Felipe's law. A lot of debates about exactly if this was accurate or not, but in Felipe's law we find a kind of slightly rounding into e, and this creates another sound. In Felipe's law, there's a lot of variations of it. It's quite a complicated topic to discuss. I'm not going to discuss it here. And what this leads to is the Ashkenaz vocalization being influenced by the Masoretic Hebrew, O and Bagat Kafat, and then the rounding of sounds. If A can be rounded to O, and there's diphthongs, Oi. Why do we hear all this Oi stuff in Ashkenaz? It's because Ashkenaz actually maintained ancient vocalizations that have to do with diphthongs, Au. I met a German Jew who would say Aulam, not Olam as we do today, but Aulam, and I asked him about this. He says, oh yeah, we have this ancient tradition. When there's an O with a Vav, it's Au, so they say Aulam, but it's only very specific words. And in Ashkenaz, you have the Tzeire, A, which is again because of the maintaining of diphthongs, which mostly are lost in most vocalizations. Masoretes for sure, 100%. Eastern Jews, Sephardic Jews. I didn't grow up with Oi either. I would hear it from my Ashkenaz and my Hasidic neighbors, but not from the way we vocalize things in synagogue. And so the Ashkenaz vocalization of, especially with the S sound at the end, may have actually only come into play about 300 years ago, because I once had a friend in Jerusalem, a rabbi, who showed me an interesting letter from Germany, I think it was, and there was a question about how to read certain words in the Torah, and the man is this is in Germany, the man is kind of describing a Sephardic vocalization, that there were expert readers amongst the Jews there who maintained older vocalizations, so they were aware of Chet and Ain and Rimel as well, the Gimel without a Dagesh, Ra, and so on. So it does raise some interesting questions. When did the specific vocalization spread in Europe? Though I think I did see a 13th or 14th century description of Jews who were describing how the Hebrew sounds, and this German writer who met them in Jerusalem wrote down some of the letters. So for him, for example, Vav is a V. He writes a W, which means V. But when it comes to the Tav, he writes an S, which is interesting, which means this type of vocalization was around for quite a while, but it may have taken a while for it to kind of explode within Jewish circles. So that's some background about the Ashkenaz vocalization. You can actually look up videos that, if you know Hebrew enough, you can look up videos and kind of follow it and hear how they vocalize these things. I highly recommend going and listen to Sephardic Jews, Ashkenazim, modern, Yemenites, my favorite, Yemenites. There's a guy called Shoam Simchoni, great voice, reads really, really well. One of my favorite vocalizations is the Yerushalmi. When I was in yeshiva many, many years ago, we had a guy there who read in the Yerushalmi style of Haftarah, which is just, it's magnificent. And especially where we were, because the guy had an amazing voice, and we had really good acoustics. So he read, I would just close my eyes and melt away. Highly recommend Yerushalmi. Just look up Yerushalmi reading of Haftarah. You will not regret it. Anyway, I hope this was informative enough. Again, any questions, anything specific, you can just contact me, leave a comment or anything of the sort, and I will be trying to make more videos. Obviously, as you can see, I put up videos once in a while because I'm mostly about writing, so you can go to my Patreon where I have lots of articles. You can go to Hebrew in Israel on Facebook, and I also have an Instagram account. I'm not really sure if anything's posted. I don't really care about Instagram, but Facebook and Patreon. And again, if anyone has any comments about this, leave them. I'll be fascinated to hear what you have to say, what you've heard, what you've seen. Corrections as well, obviously. I have no problem with corrections. And I'll see you next time. Kol Tov.